Thank you for attending this session on workers' compensation, Module 3. Let's get started. Well, what are we going to learn in this? We're going to learn some of the history of workers' compensation system in Canada. Don't worry about the dates. You will not be tested on that. Describe the goals and methods of workers' compensation boards. We're also going to talk about the problems associated with compensating for psychological conditions and occupational illnesses. And we're going to talk about the assessment methods from a workers' compensation board perspective. So I had asked the question from the class, which came first to Canada, automobiles or workers' compensation? What are your thoughts? Well, it was actually the car. If we think of Ford and the Model T car in 1904 was when the first cars started rolling. And in 1914 in Canada, in Ontario, we had the Workmen's, it was called at the time Workmen's Compensation Act in 1914. So 10 years later, we had workers' compensation in Canada. It has evolved, and we'll talk more about that in a couple of slides. When we talk about workers' compensation, what is it? Why is this important? How does this relate to you as a health and wellness practitioner? Well, first of all, workers' compensation can be very complex. It can be multi-layered. However, there are resources to help you. The Workers' Compensation Board itself, but also CCOHS. We used to have IAPA. I don't think it's around anymore. But we also have Association of Workers' Compensation Boards of Canada. When you get to the slide, you can select the link there. It is a hub of very valuable workers' compensation board information. And there are websites, social media that you can also see as well. Just make sure it's scholarly. Make sure that it is a real legitimate business, not just a practitioner or consultant. Introduction. Well, what is workers' compensation? Well, it's a form of insurance governed by an act, the Workers' Safety Insurance Act of Parliament. So the government's involved in this to help workers who are injured on the job return to work safely. It ensures the injured worker receives first aid treatment, benefits while recuperating at home, receiving proper treatment for any injuries, and rehabilitation. If you hear any noises, that's my dog Ryder. He has this little toy. Some history. Again, I'm not going to test you on the timelines, but it's just for your own understanding of how it's evolved. Back in 1884, it actually originated in Germany. And then in 1914, Canada, we had established workers' compensation. It is a collective liability for employers. It is paid by employers. It is not paid by the workers. It does not come off your paycheck. And compensation for workers, if they are injured at work, despite whatever circumstance the employer is at financially. So if they go bankrupt or they're having problems paying bills, the workers at the time would still get paid. Compensation is based on loss of earnings, so loss of your hourly pay, loss of your salary, loss of time. It is a no-fault system, similar to car accident in Ontario. Also a non-adversarial process without any penalty to the employee. The employee should not be punished, should not receive any harm for filing, and little or no recourse in the courts. Now, keep in mind, the board itself, the Workers' Compensation Board governs the insurance as well as the Workers' Safety Insurance. Historical roots, it's a collective liability where all employers in a class or other rate group are liable for the costs of any or all accidents and occupational diseases that occur in the operations of those employers. Basically what it's saying is it's a pool. It's like any insurance. It's a volume pool. They get together, you put money into the fund by the employers, but you are classified. So if you're mining, you might be a 001 classification. Construction might be classed as 002. A management consulting firm where really the biggest harm that they'll get physically, unless they're traveling, isn't going to be as serious as a mine site. But there is psychological and hazards in those firms, but they are relatively low compared to mining and construction. So they might be classed as 999, and they'll have very little rates to pay for insurance. Workers' Compensation Canada is administered by the Workers' Compensation Board. Injured workers will receive payment while off of work, and their bills, medical bills, will be paid. So think of physiotherapy, chiropractor. If it's an injury, they will pay. If it's a broken leg, let's say, and I'm touching wood, that doesn't happen to anybody. But they'll pay for the crutches. They will pay for the cast. They will pay for all the treatments, right? If the injury was work related, if it happened at work, and because of work, it was work related duties, it happened out of the due course of business. Pension, if your disability is considered permanent, they will pay for your pension. So let's say you have a defined benefit pension plan, they will pay for that. Benefits, if he or she cannot earn the same amount of money earned before the incident, so they'll also continue benefits. When we look at regulations and responsibilities of the board itself, what does the Workers' Compensation Board have to do? They have to classify employers to ensure consistency. So they would make myself a management consultant. They would put me in the same class or classification as a Deloitte or Watson Wyatt Worldwide. Even though they are bigger than me, I'm still classed with them. I wouldn't go into the mining. I wouldn't go into the hospital. I wouldn't go into another classification, basically. They decide whether an individual is classified as a worker, a subcontractor, or an employer, as each class has different conditions. So a worker is covered, a subcontractor will not be. If it's a dependent contractor basically means that they are an employee, they are a worker because they have no other employer, they have no other client, they're working over 35 hours per week. If you are given a laptop, a cell phone, a business card, you're basically an employee. It is a system that can pay benefits if worker is affected by an industrial disease that has resulted from his or her own occupation. And we'll come to diseases and industrial diseases after this. A number of changes have happened in workers' compensation board legislation around Canada, and it will continue to change, particularly when there's a change in Parliament. So this is why it's so important to watch politics. Even if you don't like it, I do recommend you stay aware of which party is in place and which one will be elected, because there can be significant changes to legislation. Some of the changes in Saskatchewan has expanded its presumptive coverage to include volunteer firefighters. Before, if you were a volunteer firefighter, you got hurt, injured, you would not be covered. Now you are. BC, British Columbia, it's expanded coverage for wildfire firefighters. And we really need that now. The last couple of years, I have family out west. It's awful, the fires that are happening. It seems to be consistent every year. Nova Scotia now has presumptive coverage of post-traumatic stress disorder for emergency responders. Alberta amended its act in 8 categories, including expanding psychological coverage and expanding the window of time in order for you to appeal. So instead of it being 30 days, you now have 3 months. So think about all of these provinces, be it Saskatchewan, British Columbia, Nova Scotia, or Alberta. Could we adopt that? The board has to make that change. Legislation has to get changed. We have to lobby our parliament to make change. So we actually have powers by voicing our opinions. So compensation rates and methods. The amount of compensation, there are 2 methods. Keep in mind 5 jurisdictions pay generally 90% of net earnings. So this means after taxes, after various deductions. The remaining jurisdictions base how much they're going to compensate on a percentage of average earnings. So this does not factor in the taxes. This is not net earnings. This is average earnings. So you have to think about the impact that has net after all taxation versus taxes still haven't come off, benefits, so on and so forth. Jurisdictions like Nova Scotia have used both methods depending on the date of the incident. So looking again, you will have to know if, let's say, you're a health and wellness expert, you are looking after workers' compensation, and you're looking after it for all over Canada, you're going to have to know every single jurisdiction. All the provinces, yay! Compensation rates and methods, economic loss. What do we mean by that? There has been a loss of wages or earnings, be it hourly rate, salary, when workers can no longer earn the same amount of money that they were earning before the incident. Non-economic loss. As an example, golf. Let's say you really enjoyed golf. You did that every week. It was part of your health and well-being. If the injured worker, they could receive non-economic loss pay. So you can't golf anymore. They may pay you a lump sum for what you have suffered because you can no longer golf. But keep in mind, there are different ways to golf now. We have fling golf. If you've seen anybody throw those balls to dogs and it looks like a little toy, they have that now. There's different ways to golf. So there's different abilities basically. So injured worker could receive non-economic loss if unable to perform some of the things that they were able to do before the incident. It could be dancing. You could have been a ballroom dancer and you really enjoyed it and you were competitive and you went all over North America or you went all over the world to compete. So they will pay you a portion, but really at the end of the day, it never really pays for what you have lost. But there are different abilities. Medical aid and incident prevention, it's all about prevention. That's about health and safety, right? But employees who do sustain a work-related injury are compensated for loss of earnings and loss of functional capacity. I want you to remember this, that part of the whole assessment, I know we're not there yet, is to obtain a functional abilities form. What can the worker do? What can't they do? And we have to support them. So what do we mean by, a loss of functional capacity? That means a limit of their ability or dexterity, but depending on the seriousness of an injury. Workers are no longer able to perform some of their job duties, such as lifting, twisting, bending, and are considered to have suffered loss of functional capacity for which benefits are payable. Occupational Health and Safety Associations, there's a number of them. I mentioned CCOHS. Workers' Compensation Board also provides information. Ministry of Labor also provides information. There are other industry groups out there, and I invite you to look them up. It's WorkSafe BC is also a good one. It does everything from educating employers, but also providing advice for workers, but also provides training, preventative measures, programs, training, safety audits, even certificates of recognition. So I invite you to look them up and potentially take some of the we did this exercise in class. What are some social goals for having compensation? Well, there's two main goals. One is to provide services to prevent injuries from happening in the first place and also to reduce psychological impact of injuries when they do occur. Provide training and development to prepare an injured worker to return to work. It's that early, safe return to work. Some social goals in terms of grounded in the following standard provisions: unlimited medical aid, in some cases artificial prosthesis, a fund to encourage reemployment. This gives employers a discount, so to speak. It's called the Second Injury and Enhancement Fund. It encourages employers to hire people who have been injured in their previous workplace. Liberal compensation and also rehabilitation. Here is some summary tables. I think this link unfortunately no longer works, so they've changed it. So if you could please take the summary tables comparing assessments and premiums for Workers' Compensation Board, Commission on Canada. If you could Google that, you'll find the new link. I apologize. I just found out today that it's no longer active, but it will say awcbc.org. It's the rest of the tag that doesn't work. So provision for second injuries. What do we mean by this? Well, second injury fund, it facilitates the reemployment of disabled workers. It gives a discount for employers basically to rehire somebody who is disabled. Without this provision for multiple injuries, employers may not hire somebody with a disability. They may be tempted to discriminate. Additional injury, it's almost like a forgiveness as well for the employer, but also giving them a discount. Additional injury could make employer responsible for far more serious disability than if the worker had not had a prior injury. So it's basically a forgiveness for the employer, but also a discount, but also creates a fair playing ground for individuals with disabilities to get hired. Here is another, I talk a lot about WorkSafe BCs, even though this context of this course is mostly Ontario. I do talk a little bit about Alberta, Manitoba. I really like Manitoba for their Workers' Compensation Board forms and templates, which you'll see later on the slides. But WorkSafe BC is a really great resource for health information. This is important for health workers and social workers. So I invite you to look at WorkSafe BC. There's some really, really great information here. Social goals of workers' compensation. Injured workers receive the physical but also social and psychological rehabilitation services as part of their compensation benefits. And this is an opportunity for employers also to extend the employee assistance program to their employees, but also their families. The families are the caregivers, right? And we have to think about their stress as well and try to alleviate it as much as possible and be supportive. Additional social goals of workers' compensation, the rehabilitation, the vocational training to get people, if we can't get people to do early safe return to work for their own job, let's retrain them for jobs that they can be employed in. Physical rehabilitation to restore that functional abilities, thinking of physiotherapy, occupational therapists, ergonomic specialists. The list goes on, right? Because it takes a village. Social rehabilitation, the psychological help, support, and again, not just for the individual, let's have this EAP for the family as well, and even provide some free resources as well. There are some free resources beyond the scope of workers' compensation and employee assistance programs. Occupational diseases and stress. Well, first of all, I want to talk about occupational diseases take a very long time. When we talk about latency period, it takes a long time. So think about latency. That's how I remember terms. I try to pick up words, and it takes quite a bit of time. It could take 20, 30 years from the time that you were exposed to asbestos before you develop a chronic disease, an occupational disease such as lung cancer. So now I'm going to go back to occupational diseases. This could include various cancers, skin diseases, allergic reactions to materials and components in the workplace. Think about, people who are outdoors quite a bit without protection, without SPF. Think about construction workers, think about roofers, think about people, gardeners, landscaping, jockeys, anybody who's outside, and UV rays and melanoma, right? The potential of it doesn't mean somebody's 100% going to get it, but we have to be proactive and preventative. When we look at occupational diseases and workplace stress, 3 groups of stress-related disabilities: the physical injury or occupational disease leading to the mental disability, mental stress resulting in a physical disability, traumatic occurrence or series of occurrences, Think of PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder, um, mental stress resulting in a mental condition. And let's be empathetic here and use our mental first aid health certificate if you have it. This is going to be very beneficial here. The Workers' Compensation Board claims process. To process a claim when a worker is injured, workers' compensation needs from each of the three parties below an employer form. It's known as Form 7 for Ontario, and it has to be submitted in 72 hours to Workers' Compensation Board. The worker, the employee, has to submit their version of the Workers' Compensation Board. And the physician who's treating, this could be at the hospital, this could be at a clinic, this could be your GP, your general practitioner, medical doctor, MD. So keep in mind, each party has to fill out a form. But for the employer, and you probably will be filling this out, it's typically HR, but I have seen accountants because it's such a small firm that the accountant is also HR and also trying to do health and wellness. I've even seen very small firms where it's the executive assistant to the president who's the HR/health and wellness and the executive assistant. But typically it'll be HR health and wellness practitioner who completes these forms. So you will be filling out the employer form known as Form 7 within 72 hours. Everything's online now, so you don't have to fax it, but I'm sure they still take fax to this day. Details do vary from jurisdiction to jurisdiction in terms of timelines, but I can tell you for Ontario, it's still 72 hours. Assessments. Employers are grouped together according to a type of operation or industry in which they're engaged in. So as I said earlier, I'm a management consultant. I had my own management consulting firm. I gave it to my husband. So we are in the same classification or group as a Deloitte consulting firm, as a Watson Wyatt worldwide consulting firm. We're not as big as them, but we're in the same class or group as them. Employers are divided into three categories. They contribute to the incident fund and benefit from collective liability. That's the pooling of money. Think of car insurance. We pool our money together as a collective. Individually liable for their own employees' incidents. And certain low-risk industries are excluded under various acts across the country. I have shown, it was, I think, when we looked at excluded industries from Workers' Compensation Board, I used Alberta as an example. It was everything from, if you owned a bowling alley, you didn't need to join Workers' Compensation Board, but there are injuries. There are injuries that can happen. Taxidermy, doctors' offices, software companies, programming. They don't need it. It's an elective. If you want to go and join it, you can. Everyone else that is not excluded is mandatory. So things like mining, construction, they typically are industries that are hazardous. Assembly lines for car companies like Ford have to join it, for instance. When we're talking about assessments, we're also looking at frequency rates of injuries. Some organizations calculate injury frequency rates to benchmark and track their own safety performance. So how are they doing this week? Or how are they doing this month? Do they have 0 injuries this month? And then next month they have an injury. And then they will say, how many near misses? At a mine site, they will state, even on their website, how many fatalities, how many deaths have happened at that mine site, how many near misses, which means the person almost died that month, and how many injuries, how many illnesses. It won't say the person's name, but they'll use this as a benchmark of how they're doing month by month. In some cases, workers' compensation boards can also provide this information to companies. This information helps organizations benchmark their health and safety. Well, I can honestly tell you, I have seen the Workers' Compensation Board reports, and it basically tells you how many people are on Workers' Compensation Board. You will know this anyway because you're going to be filling out the form. One thing I will also mention is please keep all this information under lock and key. This is private information. You may get doctor's notes. You'll have functional abilities forms. Treat it like it's your own information. Keep it under lock and key. Do not leave this on your desk. If you're in the middle of this file, this is a person's life. So I please ask you to be respectful and keep it under lock and key. If you have to leave that file for even 1 minute, take that time, put it under a file. You would hate for your own information to be out there in the open, right? Assessments, calculating injury frequency. So how do we do it? Yes, there's some math involved here. Typically, you'll get the report from workers' compensation. There is software out there that'll do it for you. But if you want to bring out your Texas Instrument calculator, or you want to use your calculator that's on your phone, by all means, give it a shot. Give it a try. So to determine the frequency of your injury ratio, consider the frequency is the number of medical aid injuries relative to the number of hours worked, expressed in a ratio of 200,000. So this is for the entire company, okay? This is not just one person. You're going to be looking at the number of injuries, let's say that month. You could do it weekly, you could do it monthly, you could do it annually. Some firms and jurisdictions use a factor of 1 million rather than 200,000. Using the 200,000 figure, the relationship becomes this math. You can use this on an Excel spreadsheet. You can pull out your Texas Instrument calculator. Most software will do it for you. So you look at your number of injuries over the total hours worked times 200,000. This is typically done monthly, just to let you know, same as the previous slide. When you're comparing benchmarking or rates, it's done on a monthly basis. Now, when you pay workers' compensation, I paid quarterly, but every organization can do it differently. You can choose to do it monthly or quarterly. Experience rating, what is it? Why bother? Why is it important to you? Well, insurance, be it workers' compensation, be it Sun Life, long-term disability, life insurance, the more that it's used, the more your premiums are going to go up, right? So if somebody claims a long-term disability through Sun Life insurance outside of workers' compensation board, it's going to affect your experience rating. It's going to go higher. That means your premiums are going to go up next year. Similar to a car. If a car if there's repeated car accidents, what's going to happen is the car insurance company, let's say it's Bel Air Direct, it's going to charge you higher rates next year, right? It takes into account clear cost experience of the employer. Firms with lower than average incident costs per worker pay lower premiums than firms with above average incidence costs. So the more incidents, the more accidents, the more injuries, you're going to just pay more. So it's an incentive for employers to stay safe, to do due diligence, 25(2)(h), to do every precaution reasonable in the safety of all workers. Safer employers will face lower workers' compensation costs given to other firms, right? Similar firms. It's basically a financial incentive for employers to play it safe. Experience rating programs. Various experience rating programs exist across provincial jurisdictions. Each province is going to be a little bit different. It's basically providing, again, an incentive for employers to play it safe. So keep always in mind, things are going to change with legislation, but also workers' compensation, some of these discounts, some of these rebates, like NEER, N-E-E-R, it's gone or about to go, okay? So keep that in mind. So for example, right now for today's context, Newfoundland and Labrador offers the opportunity for employers to reduce their rates and injuries via its prime incentive program. So it's incentivizing employers to play it safe. It's kind of like, if you drive a car and you get a car insurance and they ask you to put that app and this little thing on your car to make sure you drive 60 kilometers at a 60 kilometer zone. It's an incentive for you to drive at 60 because you're going to get cheaper. cheaper car insurance. The program compares an employer's prime claim costs to its expected range of injury costs. So it's this experience incentive range. It basically looks at, it's estimating, well, how many injuries um, are you going to get this year or this month? Because you're a Ford assembly line, we're going to estimate 10. But let's say you only did 8 this month. There was only 8 claims. Well, you're going to get a discount. Employers can receive experience refund, a discount. It's not really cash. They don't really get cash. It's just a discount on their insurance premiums. They get this refund if after 1 year their prime costs are below the bottom range. So there is a factor there that they give you a baseline. And if you're below it, woohoo, you get a refund, but you don't really get money, just discount on your premiums. So reporting requirements, employers must report all workplace injuries to workers' compensation within a certain time. Employer reports the nature of the, was this a work-related injury? They report is the employee's salary and hours of work. The nature of the employment relationship, is this worker full-time, part-time, consultant, contractor, temporary worker through a temporary agency, nature of incident and injury, what happened, and extent of time loss and medical treatment. This is Form 7. You have to fill it out in 72 hours. So here we go. Reporting requirements. What do you need to know? What do you have to do? Well, if you don't report, non-compliance can be up to a fine of $50,000. It could be $500, or it could be all the way up to $50,000. It could also trigger an audit. So file it in time. When in doubt, just file it. When employers and employees fail to comply with the Act in their jurisdiction, then penalties and fines can be applied. And they do vary based on each province and the severity. If you keep doing it over and over again where you're not filling Form 7, you're not complying with legislation, you're not cooperating with the board, you're not helping that employee with their early safe return to work, it could be a potential fine upward of $50,000. So what does this look like? This, first of all, is Manitoba. I really like Manitoba's forms when it comes to Workers' Compensation Board. This is the employer's incident report. It has to be filed within a particular timeline. Everything's done online. My recommendation for you is this. If you don't have all the information, that's fine. Just fill it out the best that you can. Put down on that last line that additional information will follow. Here's what the worker has to fill out. The employee also has to fill out work if it's a workplace related injury, incident, accident. And the physician who is treating the worker also has to fill out one. I don't have this here. I've never had to fill out one out. My other recommendation for you, once the person gets first aid, hospital treatment, is walk this worker through the form. You cannot coach them, you cannot coax them rather, but you can help support them because they're going to be worried that they're filling it out correctly. And just let them know, please fill it out on a timely basis. Please make sure that you submit it to them, but walk them through each section. You are not to fill this out for them, but just arm them with the information, give them the form, give them the website, let them know that you are there to support them, particularly if it's areas such as salary, hourly. You can provide all this information to them in advance, right? This is, it's already traumatized for the individual who has sustained this. They're already stressed about payment. They're probably worried about their job, even though you have to keep their job by law. You can always hire a temporary worker until that person can return back to work, but they're stressed out. Please help them. You know how to get hold of me by email. That's your best bet. This was a friendly reminder for forum groups. It was September 22nd, which is today. Also, discussion board questions is discussion board question number 1 is due on September 29th. We've already done the exercises in class, the group exercises in class. So please post and try to make it a collaborative experience by, responding to one another. But one thing I have to put down is please, or mention rather, please cite the Act, okay? The Occupational Health and Safety Act.